My beloved child, stop for a moment, because the person you believed was meant to be yours may have married someone else, and yet that meeting may not have been a mistake. There is a reason your paths crossed, a reason your heart recognized something before your mind could explain it, and a reason that connection still feels unfinished even though life appears to have moved in another direction. Stay with me for a moment, because what I am about to reveal may completely change the way you look at that relationship. You may have spent nights asking, why did God allow me to meet them if they were never going to stay? But perhaps the deeper question is not why they left. Perhaps the question is what their presence awakened inside you. Sometimes a person enters your life and becomes a mirror. They reveal emotions you buried, dreams you stopped believing in, and a version of yourself you had forgotten existed. And then, just when you thought the story was finally beginning, everything changes. They choose another path. They marry someone else. The future you imagined disappears. But here is the part nobody tells you. Not every divine connection is designed to end in marriage. Some meetings are designed to transform you before the right chapter arrives. That person may have been the doorway, not the destination. And if you have been secretly wondering whether their marriage means everything between you was meaningless, listen carefully, because the answer may be far more emotional than you expect. There was something you were supposed to learn through meeting them, and there is something they may have learned through meeting you. You may never know how deeply your presence affected their life. You may never hear the full story behind their decisions. But that does not mean the connection had no purpose. Sometimes God allows two people to meet at the wrong time because the meeting itself prepares both hearts for what comes later. As this unfolds, clarity will come. Think about the moment you first noticed them. Something about their energy felt strangely familiar. Maybe the conversations flowed too easily. Maybe you felt understood without explaining everything. Maybe there were coincidences that seemed almost impossible to ignore. And then came the distance, the silence, the unexpected decision, and eventually the news that they had married someone else. That news may have felt like the final page of a book you were not ready to close. But what if it was not the ending you thought it was? What if the purpose of that chapter was never to give you ownership of another person's life, but to teach you the difference between loving someone and losing yourself while waiting for them? What if your heart was being prepared for a love that does not require confusion, uncertainty, or constant guessing? This may resonate as we continue, because there is a hidden lesson here that only becomes visible after the emotional dust settles. Now listen closely, because something huge is waiting for you, and it begins with a truth that may be difficult to accept. Sometimes the person you desperately wanted is not the person God intended you to keep. That does not make your feelings foolish. It does not erase the memories. It does not mean every beautiful moment was imaginary. It simply means that a meaningful connection and a permanent relationship are not always the same thing. Perhaps they entered your life during a season when you needed to remember your own worth. Perhaps you were settling emotionally, living cautiously, or believing that love always had to hurt before it became real. Then they appeared, and suddenly you felt something again. You started dreaming again. You started believing that someone could actually understand you. And when they eventually chose another person, the pain was not only about losing them. It was about losing the future you had created in your imagination. That is why this kind of heartbreak can feel so confusing. You are not only grieving a person. You are grieving a possibility. But there is a revelation hidden inside that grief. The future you imagined with them was not necessarily the future God had prepared for you. Maybe you were shown what deep connection could feel like, only so you would stop accepting shallow connection. Maybe they raised your standards without realizing it. Maybe their presence taught you that you deserve someone who chooses you openly, consistently, and wholeheartedly. And perhaps the most surprising part is this: their marriage may actually force you to release the version of the story that was keeping you emotionally stuck. You may have been waiting for a sign, a message, a confession, or some dramatic change that would return everything to the way it once was. But sometimes the greatest sign is the invitation to stop waiting and start living. Do not mistake closure for defeat. Closure can be the moment you finally understand why the chapter had to exist. And if you are watching this while secretly thinking, "But what if they still think about me?" remember this: people can carry memories without being meant to return to them. Someone can remember your kindness, your conversations, your presence, and the way you made them feel, while still continuing on their own path. That does not diminish you. It simply reminds you that your worth was never dependent on being chosen by one particular person. Your story is bigger than one relationship. Your future is bigger than one unanswered question. And the moment you understand that, something inside you begins to shift. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and begin asking, "What was this experience preparing me for?" That question can change everything. And here is where the story becomes even deeper. Their marriage does not automatically mean that God ignored your prayers. Sometimes the answer to a prayer looks completely different from what you expected. You may have prayed for love, companionship, loyalty, and someone who understands your heart. You may have attached all of those hopes to one person because they were the person standing in front of you at the time. But God sees beyond the person you can see. You see one face. God sees an entire future. You see one relationship. God sees every consequence that could follow it. You see what you want right now. God sees what you may need years from now. That is why some doors close even when your heart is begging for them to remain open. And maybe, just maybe, the person you thought was your soulmate was actually part of your preparation for a soulmate-level love that arrives without the uncertainty. A relationship where you do not have to wonder where you stand. A relationship where you are not constantly interpreting silence. A relationship where commitment does not feel like something you have to earn. The shocking revelation may be that losing this person could have protected you from losing yourself. Think about that. If you had received exactly what you wanted back then, would you have become the person you are becoming now? Would you have discovered your strength? Would you have learned patience? Would you have recognized your emotional boundaries? Would you have learned to love without abandoning your own identity? Sometimes the person who breaks your expectations becomes the person who redirects your entire life. And that is why you should not measure the importance of a connection only by how long it lasted. A few months can change someone more than years of routine ever could. One conversation can awaken a truth that remains for decades. One person can leave your life and still leave behind a lesson that becomes part of your future. So if their wedding made you question everything, breathe. You do not need to rewrite your memories as lies. You do not need to hate them to move forward. You do not need to pretend you never cared. You simply need to understand that caring about someone does not require you to remain trapped in yesterday. Their path belongs to them. Your path belongs to you. And somewhere beyond the chapter you are currently struggling to understand, there may be a version of your life that makes today's unanswered questions finally make sense. So, my beloved child, if you are still carrying the question, why did God let me meet them? Hold on to this. Perhaps you met them because you were ready to become someone you had not yet discovered. Perhaps they came to awaken your heart, challenge your expectations, and teach you what genuine connection feels like. Perhaps their role was never to remain beside you forever, but to help you recognize what you should never settle for again. And maybe the reason this story still touches you is because the lesson is not finished. The next chapter is asking you to release the fantasy of what could have been and make room for what can actually be. Do not chase someone who has chosen another path. Do not measure your future by someone else's decision. And do not believe that because one person married someone else, your opportunity for extraordinary love disappeared with them. Your story is still moving. There are conversations you have not had, places you have not seen, people you have not met, and moments you cannot possibly predict from where you are standing today. Something huge is waiting for you, but you may not recognize it if you remain emotionally focused on a door that has already closed. Let the memory remain a memory without allowing it to become a prison. Bless the lesson. Honor what you felt. Accept what happened. And then turn toward the life that is still calling you forward. One day, you may look back at this chapter and realize that what felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like the end was actually preparation. What felt like losing your soulmate was actually losing the version of love that could never fully meet you where you deserve to be met. And when that realization arrives, you may finally understand why God allowed you to meet them in the first place. Not because you were destined to possess them, but because through them, you were destined to discover yourself. And perhaps that discovery will lead you to the love, peace, purpose, and connection you were asking for all along. Stay with that thought for a moment. Your story is not over simply because theirs took a different turn. Sometimes two paths cross for a reason, separate for a reason, and continue toward futures neither person could see at the beginning. Maybe this was never about getting them back. Maybe it was about getting yourself back. And that, my beloved child, may be the revelation that changes everything. There is one question you may have been afraid to ask until now. What if their marriage was not the proof that your connection was false, but the final lesson that your heart needed before moving forward? My beloved child, listen carefully, because this is where the story takes a completely different turn. You may have believed that because they married someone else, every moment between you must have been meaningless. But human beings do not simply erase meaningful experiences because life changes direction. They carry them. They learn from them. They remember the people who touched their hearts in ways they did not expect. You may never know what they privately think about the chapter you shared, and you should not build your future around guessing. But you can recognize what the experience did inside you. Maybe you became stronger. Maybe you became more selective. Maybe you learned that chemistry alone is not enough. Maybe you discovered that real love requires timing, clarity, mutual effort, and a willingness to choose each other openly. That lesson can be worth more than the relationship you originally wanted. And perhaps this is the surprising part. The person you thought was your destination may have been the person who prepared you to recognize your destination when it finally appears. Stay with me for a moment, because there is another layer you need to understand. Sometimes we become attached not only to a person, but to the identity we created around them. We imagine being their partner, sharing their life, celebrating milestones together, growing old beside them. When that future disappears, we feel as if part of our identity disappears with it. But you were never created to be defined by one person's choice. You existed before they arrived, and you will continue becoming someone greater after they are gone. Their marriage may have closed one possibility, but it did not close your entire future. In fact, it may have forced you to stop living emotionally in a waiting room. And there is freedom in that. You no longer have to decode every silence, analyze every old conversation, or search for hidden meanings in every coincidence. You can finally ask a much stronger question: what kind of love is worthy of the person I am becoming? That question changes the entire direction of your life. Now here is the part one want you to remember, because this is where many people misunderstand divine timing. Something can be deeply meaningful without being permanently yours. A lesson can be sacred without becoming a lifelong relationship. A person can matter without becoming your spouse. A chapter can be beautiful without becoming the whole book. As this unfolds, clarity will come, especially if you have been blaming yourself for what happened. Maybe you told yourself that you were too late, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not interesting enough, or somehow less deserving than the person they married. Stop carrying that burden. Someone else's decision is not a measurement of your value. Their marriage does not create a ranking system where they won and you lost. Life is not that simple. People make decisions based on timing, circumstances, family expectations, personal beliefs, emotional readiness, and countless things you may never fully know. You cannot compare your entire worth to a decision made within a reality you did not completely see. And perhaps there is an even bigger revelation: the version of you who wanted them so desperately may not be the same version of you who will eventually understand why they had to go. Growth changes the questions you ask. At first, you ask, why didn't they choose me? Later, you ask, why was I willing to forget myself while waiting for them? At first, you want an explanation from them. Later, you realize you can create your own closure. At first, you want their attention. Later, you want peace. That transformation is powerful. And if this message is speaking to something you have quietly carried, share this video with someone who may need to hear it too. Leave a comment about the lesson you believe this chapter taught you, not a name, not a private detail, just the lesson. Your words might reach someone who is sitting alone with the same question you once had. And if you want more stories and messages like this, subscribe, because sometimes the next message finds you at exactly the moment your heart is ready to understand it. But wait, because there is still something deeper. What if the reason you cannot stop thinking about them is not because you are meant to return to them, but because you have not yet accepted what their presence revealed about you? Maybe they showed you how deeply you are capable of loving. Maybe they awakened a tenderness you had buried. Maybe they made you realize that you want partnership instead of temporary attention. Maybe they exposed the difference between being emotionally attached and being genuinely aligned. And perhaps the most important lesson was learning that love should not require you to abandon your dignity. If someone is unavailable, you do not have to compete. If someone has chosen another path, you do not have to chase. If someone cannot offer you a clear place in their life, you do not have to spend years waiting for clarity. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming wise. You can have a soft heart and strong boundaries at the same time. You can appreciate what happened without trying to recreate it. You can remember someone without remaining emotionally stuck in their story. This may resonate as we continue, because there may come a moment when you realize that the most beautiful part of this entire experience was not getting the person you wanted, it was discovering the person you were becoming because of the experience. Think about how different that sounds. You are no longer waiting for their life to change so yours can begin. You are no longer placing your happiness on a future you cannot control. You are no longer asking for permission to move forward. Your life is already happening. And perhaps the love you have been asking for will enter your life when you are no longer trying to force one particular person to become that answer. Sometimes the heart needs to empty one old expectation before it can recognize something healthier standing directly in front of it. That does not mean you must forget the past. It means the past no longer gets to control your future. And now, my beloved child, I want you to imagine something you may not have considered. One day, you may meet someone who does not make you question whether they want you. Someone whose actions match their words. Someone who does not leave you studying silence for answers. Someone who sees your heart and does not make you compete for a place beside theirs. And when that happens, you may finally understand why the earlier connection could not continue. You may look back and realize that you were asking one person to fulfill a role they were never meant to occupy. You may realize that what you called the one was actually a turning point. The experience taught you what you wanted, what you would no longer accept, and what kind of emotional consistency matters to you. That realization may be the once-in-a-lifetime revelation you were waiting for. Not that your former soulmate secretly belongs to you, not that their marriage is destined to collapse, and not that you should interfere with their life, but that your own life still contains possibilities you cannot see yet. Something huge is waiting for you, but it requires you to stop looking backward long enough to notice it. Let their story belong to them. Let your story belong to you. If they are happy, let them have their path. If their life is complicated, that is theirs to navigate. Your responsibility is not to decode their marriage. Your responsibility is to protect your peace and keep becoming the person you were meant to become. Perhaps the greatest miracle is not that someone comes back. Perhaps it is that you finally stop needing them to. And when that happens, the emotional weight begins to disappear. The memories become lighter. The questions become quieter. The future becomes brighter. You begin to understand that God did not waste the chapter. You simply misunderstood its purpose. They were not necessarily sent to stay forever. They may have been sent to awaken something in you that needed to live. And when you finally accept that, you will realize that the story was never only about them. It was about you, Your growth, your heart, your standards, your future, and the extraordinary life that can still unfold after the chapter you once thought was your entire story has finally ended.